Of course, yeah, I know, you can applaud, but I was going to tell you some fighter pilot stories, and it takes two hands to do that, so now I don't know what I'm doing. All right. Bill wanted me to talk to you about some combat missions I flew, not out of Ubon, Thailand, but as he said, I was shot down in my 113th combat mission. You might be wondering why I had so many, because the normal tour was 100 missions North Vietnam, or 1 year, whichever came first. And of course, for almost everybody, the 100 missions came way before a year's time went by. And the reason I had so many missions goes back to before I went to Vietnam. I was stationed at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida in the 33rd Wing, specifically in the 40th Attack Fighter Squadron. And I have an old friend of mine here, Jack Wilson, a fellow member of the Fighting 40th, who he informed me tonight that he and I were at the same river rat reunion back in 1973. I don't remember seeing him there. Last I remember seeing Jack was in sometime in 1966 at Eglin. At any rate, when I was at Eglin, I was at a commander's call one Friday afternoon, and the squadron commander said, "I need some volunteers, and anybody that wants to volunteer, come to my office after the commander's call and see me." So I went to his office and said, "I volunteer." And you know the old saying, you never volunteer. Well, I did. And he said, "You sure you want to volunteer?" "Yes, sir." "Well, I haven't told you what for yet." "That's okay, I'll volunteer anyway." And he says, "Well, okay, as long as you're sure, but I can't tell you what you're volunteering for because they won't tell me." Well, make a long story short, I volunteered to be a wild weasel. Yeah, and the very term wild weasel back then was a top secret code name, and I went through the wild weasel program, not in the F-105. Like the F-105 had the wild weasel mission back in those days, but the F-4 was becoming more and more prominent in Southeast Asia, and the F-4 and 105 were not very compatible in combat. And so it was decided F-4 squadrons needed their own wild weasel protection. And so the F-4 wild weasel program began in early 1966. We had 4 airplanes, we had 12 pilots. That was the charter group of F-4. These are F-4 seats, the charter group of the F-4 wild weasels. And we underwent training at Nellis. And our commander at Nellis was none other than Chuck Yeager, the first man to break the sound barrier. And I got to fly in his back seat a number of times, and for a young lieutenant to be flying with a guy like that, I mean, that was like a dream come true. That was a pretty exciting set of circumstances for me. Well, while I was at Nellis undergoing that training, the Air Force Fighter Weapons Center took possession of the very first F-4D models, and they were used in the fighter weapons school. And so all the best fighter pilots in the Air Force going through fighter weapons school were getting to fly those first F-4D models. And they didn't have any backseaters going through fighter weapons school. So they had to have somebody flying in the back seat of those airplanes. And so the front seat pilots had to take turns flying in the back seat while they're going through weapons school. And I was sitting at the Oakland one night with the other wild weasel backseaters, F4 wild weasel backseaters. And we heard a group of those F4 front seaters in the weapons school at a table next to us griping about how they had to take turns flying in the back seat because there are no backseat pilots at Nellis. We raised our hand and said, yes, there are. And so next thing you know, the 6 of us, the backseaters, were taking turn flying all the weapons school missions. As a young lieutenant, that was pretty darn exciting. So I was flying F4C and F4D on the same assignment. Kind of an unusual thing. Well, in the meantime, the F-105s were, crews were being trained at Nellis as well. The 105s were being modified at the Republic aircraft plant to carry the Shrike missile. And the 105 Weasel crews would come into Nellis, get training, pick up their airplane, and ferry it to Southeast Asia. But before they could take possession of their airplane, it had to undergo some test flights after a major modification like that. And so the problem was that they had no backseaters that knew the Weasel gear to fly in the backseat of those F-105s. So again, here we are, 6 F-4 Wild Weasels saying, we're completely trained. We'll fly in the backseat. So I started flying test flights on all those F-105 F Wild Weasel airplanes coming through. So there's a third airplane I'm flying on the same assignment. Pretty unusual thing back in those days. Impossibility for that to happen these days. But as a first lieutenant, that was a really exciting thing. And that's where I got to meet Cheryl's husband, Tom Pyle. He was one of the F-105 heroes going through training at Nellis. And so I got to know Tom pretty well there at Nellis. And then as fate would have it, we both ended up in the Hanoi Hilton and lived together for a while. Okay. So, my whole point was, why did I get all those extra missions in Southeast Asia? Well, it's because the Weasel gear was not working properly in the F-4. We had a lot of problems with it. We ended up deploying all the pilots to Ubon, and we went without our airplanes. And it took quite a while after that before eventually got the problems fixed, and you started seeing the 4 wild weasels in Southeast Asia. But in the meantime, here we had these 12 pilots that are trained for the mission at Ubon, and the powers that be didn't want us to fly. Now, Robin Olds is the wing commander. He said, I need these guys flying. I'm short on people here. And folks back in the Pentagon were trying to limit us to 1 counter per week. A counter, of course, being a mission over North Vietnam. And so I had to do something. They needed pilots to fly combat missions. And so I ended up flying all the Laotian missions. And so I started piling up a lot of combat missions. They just weren't many of them in North Vietnam at the time. And then come April of 1967, and Robin Olds was getting really frustrated about the way the war is going. We get a lot of targeting information, bombing targets in the jungle that we can't see. We don't know what they are. Drop the bombs. You don't even know if you hit anything. You know, we used to joke all we were doing is making toothpicks out of the jungle. Right? And the whole issue there was the fact that we had a good camera film from the RF-101s and RF-4s that were flying over the jungle. But that film was being sent back to Washington, D.C., and the story we were told, and I don't know if it's true or not, but we were being told that the targeting then was done in the basement of the White House. And somebody was looking at the film. They were drawing up the frag orders that got sent to places like Ubon, and 2 weeks later, we go out on a mission. Well, 2 weeks after the fact, whatever they might have seen on the film was no longer there. And it was such a waste of time, people getting killed, and Robin wasn't happy about it. So at the time, the only operational outfit in Southeast Asia, a flying outfit that had their own intelligence shop, was at Phnom Penh. And when I say everybody had an intelligence shop, but that was the only intelligence shop that was doing targeting for their own airplanes. And so Robin selected two lieutenants, backseaters, Steve Croker and myself, both in the 433rd Attack Fighter Squadron, and he sent us to Phnom to fly with the 606 Air Commando Squadron to learn how they were doing their targeting. And we went for 3 weeks TDY, and our mission was to come back and brief him and tell him how it was done, so we could start implementing it at Ubon. So I arrive at Phnom Penh. I'm there to fly the T-28D, the old single-engine prop advanced trainer that preceded the T-37, Tweety Bird jet that replaced it. T-28 was modified to carry a whole bunch of ordnance and flares, and had a 50 cal machine gun mounted in the wing root of each wing, and we had about 600 rounds of 50 cal ammunition. And so our mission mostly was to fly up and down the Ho Chi Minh Trail at night, looking for trucks, and that was an exciting mission. And it would, if you want to stick around till 2 o'clock in the morning, I can tell you about some of that. But that was the primary mission. Secondary mission in the T-28 was flying day mission. I had probably about 6 missions I flew during the day, which were in support of Special Forces extraction. This was 18 extraction, the 18 being the group that would actually make contact with the enemy. And the scenario was the same on every one of those missions. The Jolly Greens are going in to pick them up. They're in radio contact. I'm in the T-28 on the same frequency, waiting for them to call for support of the Jolly Greens, and it was always the same. The Special Forces A-teams were running down the jungle trail with the enemy hot on their tail, screaming, "Where's the T-28s?" So got to go in and strafe the jungle behind them and keep the enemy off them until Jolly Greens could pick them up and get them out of there. And again, some pretty exciting stuff for a young lieutenant. Oh, by the way, I'm an F-4 fighter pilot, right? And so they gave me this little single-engine prop job and say, "Go fly it." And well, when I got to Phnom Penh, they gave me one orientation ride, and that's it. Now go do it. That's another one of those things I don't think you could do today. It was kind of unusual back then. So I was doing that, but in between getting checked out in the F-4, which was at Davis Monthan, and going to my first operational assignment at the 40th at Eglin, I stopped at Herbert Field to undergo air ground operations school and trained to be a forward air controller, because every fighter squadron at the time was required to have two fully trained forward air controllers in case you ever went in support of an Army unit somewhere and the Army didn't understand the performance capabilities of U.S. aircraft, so we needed some fighter pilots that were trained as forward air controllers to provide that support of Army units. I never had to do that. However, there I am at non-comp flying the T-28s and flying mostly at night. Sitting in the O Club one afternoon drinking, which was what we did every afternoon, because if you ever been to non-comp, there wasn't anything else there to do. I mean, that was remote duty at non-comp. I mean, we didn't even have a paved runway. I don't know if you all knew that, but we were flying off of pure steel planking, and that by itself is an interesting thing to do. So I'm sitting in the O Club, drinking, as I recall, it was a bottle of Mateus Rosé. Non-comp was the very end of the logistics trail in Southeast Asia. That's the last place the C-130 ever stopped. C-130s would make the rounds of all the bases, doing things like dropping off movies to show in the base theaters. And by the time they got to NKP, the only thing left on board were the silent movies. So I saw more darn silent movies than you can imagine. Okay, and we had the same problem with the booze. They were supplying all the clubs with alcohol, and by the time they got to NKP, you got whatever they had left, and one day all they had left was cases of Mateus Rosé. So sitting in the club drinking Mateus Rosé, and there's a table next to me, some forward air controllers from the 23rd Tactical Air Support Squadron, talking about the missions they're flying, and I overheard them talking, and I went over, sat down with them, and I said, I'm a forward air controller. They said, you are? Well, what are you doing here? And I explained to them, well, I'm actually an F-4 pilot out of Ubon, but I'm here to fly with T-28s. And they said, would you like to fly the O-1? We need pilots. And I said, well, yeah, sure. So there I am volunteering again. So I ended up flying some forward air control missions, which again were pretty darn exciting. I ended up in those 21 days of TDY at NKP, I flew 41 missions, basically 2 a day. That's a pretty heavy part flying. And some of you have heard Robin Olds talk, and I think it's in the book he wrote, talk about the missions that he flew over North Vietnam, and the F-4 were a heck of a lot tougher than anything he ever flew over Germany during World War II. Well, I'm here to tell you that those missions I flew in Laos in those little puddle jumping airplanes, prop-driven, single-engine puddle jumping airplanes, was one heck of a lot tougher than anything I ever flew in the F-4 over North Vietnam. Every single mission, we got the living heck shot out of us. I mean, we never had a milk run. Every time up, he got fired at by small arms fire, 23 millimeter, 37, 57, you name it. And for my time flying out of Ubon, I got my share of medals. But those missions out of NKP over Laos were a heck of a lot tougher, a heck of a lot more dangerous. And none of us there ever got a single medal for that. Why? Well, because that was our job. I mean, being shot at every day was what we're supposed to do, I guess. So different mindset, different missions, different airplane. Okay, but enough on that. So that's gives you some background of why I flew so many missions. So go ahead. All right, let's switch gears a little bit here now. And I want to talk about POWs and survival stories and the injuries that we face and how we're doing now. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about the mission I was shot down on. You can go to that. No, go to Bill's slide that with the full screen.
Already took it off.
Oh, you took it. Okay.
Yeah, so, but
Never mind.
You're on you now.
Okay, go back to number one. Okay. So, as Bill said, that is a painting of my 113th combat mission, or as I like to say, my 112 and a half combat mission, because I had one more takeoff than I had landing. And what you see there in the F4 in the foreground is Robin Olds and his backseater, Steve Croker, who was the other person that was at non-confinant with me. And the F4 in the background is my airplane, Jack Van Loan out of the 433rd was my aircraft commander, and I was in his back seat. So Robin is Tango 01, Jack Van Loan and I are Tango 02. We had about 100 airplanes involved in the mission that day, May 20th, 1967. Excuse me, the target was the Kep Railroad Yards, 40 miles outside of Hanoi on the Northeast Railroad, which led up into China. And that railroad yard at Kep was the main marshaling yard on that railroad, so obviously a strategic choke point to try to knock out. And we were, in early '67, we were starting to have a lot of problems with MiGs. The F-105s were constantly being jumped. The tactics were always changing, and by that time, the MiGs were trying not to get involved in dogfights, but would attack the thuds from the rear, trying to pick off tail end Charlie. And so it was decided they needed MiG-cap support. So we started sending up F-4s to fly with them to provide that support. So that day we had 8 F-4s out of the 433rd. Ballot flight was being led by one of our flight commanders, Phil Combis. His backseater was my roommate at Ubon, Lieutenant Dan Lafferty. And they were leading a 4-ship that was up at the front of the Thud strike force. And Robin Olds was leading the other 4-ship, which besides Jack Van Loan and I, Tango 3 was in my flight at the 433rd. Somebody you all know, Bob Pardo of Pardo's Push fame, and his backseater, Lieutenant Steve Wayne. And we were heading into the target, and Phil Combis in ballot flight said he spotted some MiGs, but they were too far away. He was going to leave that for Tango flight. And that, oddly enough, was the last thing I ever heard on the radio, and I didn't know why for a while, but I'm sitting in the back seat off of Robin Olds' wing, and I head down the cockpit in my radar trying to find those MiGs that Phil Comby saw, and I couldn't find them. I finally figured out as the reason I couldn't find them is we were right on top of them. I was looking off in the distance somewhere, and when I brought my head up out of the cockpit, this is where we are. That is just at that moment. And what we saw were 32 MiGs, 32 MiG-17s, flying in two defensive wheels. They were flying in two ship formations, eight groups of two ships in each wheel, one at 14,000 feet, which was our run-in heading, the other down on the deck, which in this mountainous terrain was actually about 8,000 feet mean sea level. So about 6,000 feet below us. And part of what I'm telling you is comes from other people, because 10 years after the fact, when I got back from Vietnam, a bunch of us got together on a number of occasions and talked over this mission. It's a pretty historic mission. A lot of things are written on it, but none of the things that were written ever included Jack Van Loon and my perspective of what was going on. So what transpired was that Bob Pardo in number 3 radioed to Robin that he spotted that lower wheel. There were a threat to the thuds, and Robin said, "Go get him." And so Bob and his wingman attacked the lower wheel. As Bob stated, he never saw his wingman again until they rejoined on the tanker. He doesn't know what the heck happened to him. We all suspect what happened to him, but he wasn't around for the fight. And those things sometimes happen in combat. And so Bob Pardo is eventually, or essentially, a one-man show, or two-man. He's got a backseater, attacking 16 MiGs. And here we are, Robin's attacking the other 16, and I'm right on his wing. And I'm looking up just as we're flying right through the middle of those 16 MiGs at 14,000 feet. Robin rolls in on the tail of those two MiGs, and he has two other MiGs roll right in on his tail. Now this is a close-in dogfight. I have to impress upon you that we're doing 600 mile an hour. We have 350 yards of separation between airplanes. And you know that to shoot an enemy airplane down with a missile from an F-4, you have to have a mile separation. That altitude and airspeed, you have to have a mile separation for that missile engine to fire. Missile gets up to speed, it stabilizes, it guides, and then it can hit the target. Well, we didn't have that kind of separation. In addition, we had no guns in the F-4Cs in those days. The MiG-17s had two guns, 23 millimeter and 37 millimeter. And I was screaming on my radio to Robin, Tampa lead, break right. You got two MiGs on your tail. Although I was using a more colorful word at the time, but nonetheless, he was not responding, and I couldn't figure out why. And then it dawned on me, I don't have a radio. Just as we attacked those MiGs, we lost the radio in our airplane. And you can't clear your own 6 o'clock in an F-4. You have to rely upon your wingman. That's why in combat in a 4-ship, we usually flew as two elements. 2 protects the tail of lead, 4 protects the tail of 3, 3 and 4 protect the tail of first element, we protect the tail of the second element. So it's a lot of cross watching between airplanes to make sure everybody's covered. And all that relies on radio communication, and we had no radio. And at that point in time, the 2 MiGs on Robin's tail had him absolutely bracketed. They had already begun burst firing their 23 millimeter. And it's an idiosyncrasy in the 23 millimeter in the MiG-17s is that they had to do a couple of bursts in order to calibrate their gun sight before they could fire to effect. And so they did those 2 bursts at Robin to calibrate their gun sights and hadn't yet fired to effect. And Jack Van Loon and I are watching this, and Jack says, Haas, my nickname back those days was Haas, and Jack's nickname was Buns. And just an aside, we were considered the heaviest crew in TAC. Both of us were pressing our maximum weight limit for flying an airplane, and Robin Holdsworth was always giving us trouble about it. And we were in the club one night after flying a mission, and Robin walks in, and he'd been drinking, and he walks up to us and starts riding Jack and I about how heavy we are. And Jack turns to Robin and says, "Who would you rather have on your wing in combat, a track star or a fighter pilot?" That was the end of that discussion. Robin never bothered us about it. But Robin was lucky that day he had a couple of fighter pilots on his wing. And so Jack says, Haas, can you get a lock on those MiGs? And I said, no, Buns, I can't. They're too darn close. And he says, well, we have to do something because Robin's about to get shot down. And I said, yeah, any suggestions? And he said, I'm going to fire a Sparrow across their bow, try to scare them off. And that's what we did. We slid out to the right of Robin and dropped back and angled in and fired a Sparrow across the bow of those 2 MiGs on Robin's tail. That got their attention, and they got the heck out of there. They broke hard left and down, and they were literally headed for the weeds. They wanted nothing to do with tangling with an F4 in a dogfight. And so that saved Robin's life. He was dead man walking at that time, no question. If they started firing for effect, they had him absolutely bracketed. And if he wasn't killed as a minimum, he would have been shot down and ended up in the Hanoi Hill. But in the meantime, I'm sitting there watching our Sparrow missile. Of course, it's not guiding, so it's going ballistic over the horizon, and following curvature of the Earth due to gravity. And right on its tail was a Russian heat-seeking ATOL missile. That got my attention. I said, where the heck did that come from? So I'm craning around, looking back behind me. There's 2 MiG-17s on our tail. The next thing I see is they start burst firing their 23 millimeter, and you get these big red golf balls going either side of the canopy. And the 23 millimeter had red tracers, 37 yellow tracers, so you could tell the difference between the 2. So two bursts of 23 millimeters, they're calibrating their gun sights. We're about to be toast. And so Jack puts us into a 4G climb and turn, full afterburner. Well, MiG-17s can't stick with an F4 in that maneuver, and we quickly lost those 2 MiGs on our tail. I looked over my right shoulder, and I just watched them literally stall out below us and disappear. Well, we got to the top of our turn, and I glanced down the airspeed indicator. It said 250 knots, and I said, Robin, watch your airspeed. I said to Jack, watch your airspeed. So he immediately pushed the nose over to start getting up some airspeed. And here's 2 more MiGs at our 2 o'clock position, diving on us, firing their 37 millimeters. And we broke hard into them, trying to get them to overshoot, but we just didn't have the airspeed. I mean, we lost all our energy levels saving Robin, and there was nobody to save us. And they hit us in the aft fuselage with 2 37 millimeter cannon shells. And of course, that's where the main fuel tank sits. And our airplane catches on fire. And Jack said, Hoss, we've been hit. And I said, yeah, I know it. And then for some reason I asked how bad are we hit. I don't know why I asked, because I knew. I mean, the whole idiot panel in the cockpit was lit up like a Christmas tree, including both fire engine warning lights, even though I couldn't see any fire or smell any smoke. And but Jack answered me. He said, Hoss, my stick is frozen. So I just instinctively grabbed my stick and I said, yep, mine's frozen too. And he says, we're gonna have to get out. And I said goodbye and pulled the handle. Just that quick. Jack and I had this discussion many times about what do you do in a situation like that. And he says, if your airplane's not flying, you got no business still being in it. And so when he said, we're gonna have to get out, I didn't even think. It was instinctive. I just said goodbye and I pulled the handle. And the last thing I saw as I was reaching for the handle was two more MiGs at 10 o'clock diving on us, firing on us. So, in all the things that were written about this dogfight, and by the way, as far as we know, this is still considered the longest dogfight in the history of jet aviation. It lasted about 15 minutes, which is an eternity when you're over enemy territory, in and out of afterburner the whole time. Didn't quite last 15 minutes for me, but for the rest of the guys it did. But a lot written about it, and some people say that we were outnumbered 24-1, 28-1. Robin says in his book we attacked 16 MiGs. Well, yeah, but he wasn't counting the other 16 that Bob Pardo attacked. So we actually had 4 airplanes, well, minus Bob's wingman. We had 3 F-4s actually attacking 32 MiGs. When you talk about being outnumbered, outgunned, we had no guns. My airplane didn't have a radio. A lot of things going against us, but so I Jack and I both got a distinguished flying cross for that mission, and the citation on the DFC said that we were outnumbered 10-1 in that battle. Well, I don't know. I do know that I wasn't counting MiGs at the time. I didn't have a checklist. Yeah, there goes 2 over there. There goes 2 over there. No, there wasn't any of that thing going on. You're not worrying about how many there are. You're just trying to get the job done. But what I do know for sure is this: there were 2 MiGs that Robin attacked. 2 on his tail is 4. 2 on my tail is 6. 2 at 2 o'clock firing on us was 8. 2 more coming from 10 o'clock is 10. So Tango 1 and Tango 2 were engaged with 10 MiGs for sure, all in one, what Robin referred to as a great big fur ball, or he said it was just like an old World War II wiffle bill. It was MiGs and F-4s going round and round. And that's exactly what it was like. He said that was the most intense dogfight he had ever been in. Well, the story doesn't quite end there. Jack and I punched out very close to each other, and we're side by side in the chutes all the way down. And we're floating down the chutes, and the next thing you know, here comes 2 more MiGs from our right side, making a gunning pass on us, trying to shoot us out of the chutes. And I don't care which side of the war you're on, all pilots know the same thing. That's a no-no. You don't do that, okay? But those 2 MiG pilots were trying to shoot us out of the chutes. Fortunately, our old buddy Bob Pardo spotted them, and he got on the tail of those 2 MiGs and chased them off of us. And they went by us so close. The MiGs broke left and went behind us. They didn't want to hit us because we get sucked into their intake and they go down too. So they turned to avoid us. Bob Pardo broke right and went in front of us. And he was so close to Jack and I when he went by in front of us that even though he and Steve Lane have the visors down and their oxygen masks on, I could recognize both of them. I knew exactly who was in that airplane. And so as Bob went by, I waved to him, and he rocked his wings in acknowledgement, and that's the last I saw of him for about 10 years. 10 years later, 4 years after I got back from Vietnam, I ran into him at a reunion at Randolph Air Force Base in San Antonio. Bob spotted me, came over, gave me a great big hug, and he stepped back and looked at me and said, "Hoss, you crazy SOB, why did you wave to me?" And then, "Bob, I just wanted to let you know I was okay." Well, I mean, that's a matter of perspective. Truth was, I was a long ways from being okay, and it was only going to get worse. But at that point, at that point in time, I felt I was okay. I mean, at least I was alive, and I wanted them to know it. It's interesting that Cheryl and I were in Middleburg, Virginia earlier this year, at a ceremony at VFW Hall where we were presenting a copy of that print, and some of my family were there, my sister and brother-in-law and niece, and we were talking about that incident and my waving to Bob and Bob rocking his wings and I guess I made the comment that so you guys knew I was okay, right? And they all said no, we never heard anything about that. And I for 6 years in jail, I just assumed that in the debriefing that word would have gotten out, and Bob Pardo said that he debriefed it, but that information never got to my family. That's not the way it worked, and so I was a prisoner for more than 3 years before my family ever did find out what had happened to me. But anyway, that's how I got shot down. So. How much time have I got? Oh, I'm about out of time. Perfect, right on schedule. We're gonna talk about what it shows up there. I want to give you a little bit of profile on the POWs and who they were. And you can see 735 POWs total. 662 of us survived. And you can see the breakdown of the countries, and of course the bulk of us, as you might expect, were captured in North Vietnam. The very bottom, that 90% survival rate is really phenomenal. If you look at the statistics of World War I, World War II, Korean War, survival rates for POWs were not very high, and it's I can't explain it. None of us can. It's phenomenal that as many of us, as bad off as we were, and as long as we were there, that we came back in one piece. Most of us, of course, being captured in North Vietnam were aircrew members. There were only 4 enlisted. 3 of those were Air Force pararescue personnel that went down in helicopters during rescue attempts. The 4th was a Navy seaman, Doug Hagdell, who was a seaman apprentice on board a destroyer off the coast of North Vietnam in the Gulf of Tonkin. And he went topside one night for a cigarette break, not knowing that his destroyer was about to start shelling the coast. And when the big guns on that destroyer went off, the concussion blew Doug overboard. And so he's out in the Gulf of Tonkin at night without a life raft or a life vest, treading water, and nobody on ship missed him. It was a Saturday night. People slept in Sunday, and it was a long time before they discovered they're missing a crewman. Doug, in the meantime, treaded water in that dark ocean for 10 hours. How many of you could have done that? I would have drowned in about 2 minutes, I know. Yeah. 10 hours he treaded water before he got picked up by a Vietnamese fishing boat. Ended up in the Hanoi Hilton with the rest of us. You look, go back one slide, I'm sorry. You look at the number of years we're there, most of us 5 to 8 years, and that was unprecedented in terms of POW histories for the U.S. Our average age was 30. We had a lot of combat missions, and had an awful lot of injuries, and I'm going to be talking about that soon. But before I do, I want to just tell you a few survival stories about some other people that I lived with in Hanoi. None of these stories, I got none of these stories third hand. I lived with each of these guys, and so I heard their stories directly, and I just wanted to give you kind of a feeling for the type of things that people survived in combat. Major Al Runyon was an RF-101 pilot and went down in April of '66. He's flying at 14,000 feet with his cameras running, got the airplane on autopilot, sitting there, nice day, there's no AAA threat or SAMs or anything, and just a quiet day, and he's sitting there letting the airplane do its thing. Next thing he knows, he's hanging in his parachute. He doesn't know why. He didn't get hit, didn't pull the ejection handle. 101s like the F4 had the Martin Baker seat. And what happened was he hit the top of the mountain, the airplane disintegrated around him, and the chute opened. And the Martin Baker tech reps would tell you that's impossible, that can't happen. But it did. Captain Barry Bridger and Lieutenant Jim Gray, they were in the 497th Night Fighters out of Ubon. And we were on a mission called Bolo 2. Everybody knows about Bolo 1, right? Yeah, not many people knew that there was actually a Bolo 2 back in sometime around January, February of 1967. And that was a 16 ship out of Ubon. Half of us were 433rd and half of us were 497th. Why they had the night fighters flying a day mission on a location like that, I don't know. But switching from night to day is not a good thing in combat. But that was the makeup. Our flight lead was none other than Chappie James, and we went into the 16 Ford. We went into North Vietnam trying to get the MiG-21s to come up so we could shoot some down, just like happened in Bolo 1. And unfortunately, we had a solid undercast below us, about 3,000 feet below us, which means we couldn't see the ground. And on days like that, the MiGs never came up. They fired the SAMs instead. And sure enough, we had 15 SAMs come up through those clouds. Now, a SAM is a scary thing, but if you see it coming, you can outmaneuver. And when I say see it coming, that means you have clear skies and you see the missile leaving the launch pad in a great big cloud of dust. But we didn't see it until it was 3,000 feet away, coming up, white missile coming up through white clouds. And all hell broke loose, needless to say. We all went into evasive maneuvers. We were each carrying a jamming pod by that point in time, which really helped. But Bridger and Gray was the number 4 airplane in their flight, and their jamming pod was inoperative, and they knew that. They discovered that on the pre-flight, and their flight lead said, "Don't worry about it. Just keep it tucked in tight all the way, and you'll be protected by our pad." Well, when the SAMs came up, everybody went into evasive maneuvers. Number 4, as always, got slung out wide, lost the jamming protection, and took a head-on from a SAM. SAM doing about Mach 3, F4 doing about almost Mach 1, so almost Mach 4 rate of closure. And the other 30 pilots up there from the Wolfpack that day saw the same thing, each from a slightly different perspective, but we all saw the same thing. Head-on hit, great big fireball, and when the fireball cleared, just this debris field with tiny pieces of metal floating down. No chutes, no beepers, nothing. And so when we got back, we briefed what we saw, and as a result, they were listed as probably killed in action, and their families were so informed. Much to my surprise, when I got shot down in May of that year and made my way to the Hanoi Hilton, started tapping on the walls, and somebody was giving me a briefing on everybody that was in the Hanoi Hilton at the time. The names Bridger and Gray came up, and I responded back through the wall, "That can't be, I saw them die." And I said, "No, they're here and they're fine." How did that happen? Well, that's a long story, but there are things that happen in combat you cannot explain. Not everything happens the way you think you saw it. Jack Rollins was a radar observer in the back seat of a Navy F-4B, and his airplane was hit by ground fire. They were flying, but not very well. Aircraft commander decided, "I can see the coast, I'm going to try to make it to the coast so we can inject over water." They didn't quite make it, and they made a rather late decision that we're not going to reach the water, bail out now. Jack bailed out, and his front seater was right behind him. But the aircraft was in a nose-up attitude at the time. The front seater got a little bit more elevation. He got one full swing in the chute before he hit the ground. Jack got out a little bit lower. His chute never opened, and Jack hit the ground without a chute, going about 250 miles an hour. And he walked away from it. It helped that he landed in a rice paddock. Okay, still, that sort of thing can't happen, but it did. It did. Jack had an awful sore back the whole time I lived with him. I'll tell you that. Herbie Stockman was a squadron commander out of Da Nang, and like Al Runyon, he was pulling off of a target on a dive bomb run, and all of a sudden he finds himself hanging in a parachute. Never pulled the handle, and he found out years later, while we're still in jail, that he had a mid-air collision with somebody else. 2 pilots in the other airplane did not survive. Herbie's backseater did not survive, but and that comes to a shock. You're flying along, next thing you know, you're hanging in a chute, have no idea what happens. And some people survive and some people don't. And, we don't get to make the choice of who that is. The final one was Terry Boyer, an F-4C backseater, and an F-4D backseater. And Terry was flying a night mission, got hit by AAA, had to eject, and went down in the jungle at night, which is a scary thing because the tree canopy is up as high as 300 feet in Southeast Asia. And so his parachute is hanging in the top of a tree, and he's dangling from it. Now we all carried in, and some of you may recall, we all carried 200 feet of nylon rope, rolled up in the bottom pocket of one of our legs. That sounds like an awful lot of rope, but nylon is very strong, the rope is very thin, and you can fold it up, and it fits in a pretty small package. It fits in that flight suit pocket. And we were taught how to rig up a pulley arrangement with that rope in our parachute risers so that we could safely lower ourselves slowly out of a tree if we went down in one. But the instructions included the fact that if you go down at night, don't do that. You can't see, you don't know where you're at. Just hang there until daylight and then rig yourself up the pulley and let yourself out. Well, Terry Boyer was going to have none of that. He didn't want to hang there all night. He didn't want to wait for somebody to come and find him. He was going to get out of there. So he started letting himself down at night. Next thing you know, the parachute lets loose from the top of the tree, and he finds himself hurtling head first down through the tree limbs at night. Can't see a thing. And luckily, a loop of that nylon rope got tangled around one ankle, and he came to a screeching halt. And nylon rope isn't like bungee jumping. There's no give in that rope. When you come to a stop, you come to a dead stop. And Terry said, "Oh, I learned my lesson." He said they were right. There's a reason you don't do that. And so he said he hung there the rest of the night, didn't move a muscle, didn't want to jiggle the tree above him or anything. And so he's hung there by one ankle upside down all night. Well, morning comes kind of slow in that dense jungle, but when the light did start to filter through the trees and Terry could see, he said he looked up, which was actually looking down, and he said, "There's the ground right here." Yeah. So, yeah. Why do some people die in combat and other people live? I mean, you can't explain those things. No, you cannot. All right. There were a lot of people shot down in Southeast Asia, and they all have stories like this, and you'd be here for a month telling them all. So we'll move on. I wanted to talk about the injuries that we face, and you have an opportunity, a lot of opportunities to get injured in combat, between the shoot down and capture and torture and all, and we'll talk quickly about some of those. And I'm going to concentrate on just 5 people, five aircrew members living together in a cell in the Hanoi Hilton. We were put together as a 5-man group because we all had serious life-threatening injuries, and the Vietnamese were not going to take care of us. They expected us to take care of each other. And so we're going to go through each one of these real quickly. Tom Sterling was a F-105 EWO in a wild weasel. And when he got shot down, he broke both legs, the thighs, which is typical in the F-105 ejections. He was one of the exceptions. They took him straight to the hospital in Hanoi, did surgery, put titanium pins in his legs, and his legs eventually healed up. One odd thing about Tom was the doctors explained to the guards that he was supposed to receive a glass of milk twice a day to help the healing process of his legs. Something got lost in the translation. The guards weren't very bright, and so for 30 days after captivity, the only thing he got to eat or drink was a glass of milk twice a day. Things weren't tough enough. Okay, Red McDaniel was a senior officer in in our group. He was an A6 pilot, and when he ejected, he smashed his knee, got it pretty mangled up, crushed 2 vertebrae in the spine. Then when he was tortured, they really mangled up his right arm, and when he walked into that cell, if you want to call it walking, he looked like a zombie. The other 4, as bad as we all were, we couldn't believe what he looked like. He was hunched over because of the broken vertebrae. He had his right arm, which is mangled during torture, just hanging uselessly at his side, and he couldn't put any weight on his left leg, so he would stay up with his right leg, take a step, and he was dragging the left one behind, going like this. And he honest to God, looked like a zombie. And he was a real basket case. Never got any medical attention. Bill Metzger was the worst of the lot. He was a Navy F-8 pilot, involved in a dogfight, shot down 2 MiGs, and then he was hit right in the cockpit by AAA. Never got credit for the 2 MiG kills because the gun came and went down with the airplane. But when he ejected, he fractured his right femur, and he had a 2-pound shrapnel wound in his left leg. It gashed the muscle open, laid it open like you were filleting a fish. He had a gash that went from his knee to his hip and extended all the way to the bone, and you could see the glistening femur down at the bottom of that gash. And he had multiple shrapnel wounds in both arms, like somebody opened up on him with a 12-gauge shotgun with a double-load buck. And we were picking pellets out of his arm for weeks. They put 3 staples in the gash in his left leg, but they tore right out. Never gave him any more medical attention. Never set his leg. His bones healed up, overlapping, and he ended up coming out of the war with his right leg 3 inches shorter than his left leg. It was commonplace for us to pace around ourselves, and that was easy for Bill because he was in a constant right-hand turn everywhere he walked. The good news on Bill, he got back home and convinced the Navy that he found a civilian doctor that could not fix his right leg, but said he thought he could cut 3 inches of bone out of his left leg. Navy said, "Go for it, we'll pay for it." He had that operation. Bill was shot down at 6'1". He came out of that operation at 5'10", and he said, "I can live with 5'10". Got back on flying status with the Navy.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Then there was me. Okay. I was the only walking wounded in the group. And I had multiple injuries, as you can read up there, and I'm not going to go through them all, but when I hit the ground, I landed on top of an 8,000-foot high mountain in a little clearing on a downslope, tore all the ligaments out of my right knee, and it's the type of injury that if it occurs on a football field, you don't get up and walk off. And when I was examined, when I got back after Operation Homecoming, doctors looked at me and I told them what happened, and they asked me, "Well, what did you do?" I said, "What do you mean, what did I do?" And they said, "Well, you certainly couldn't stand up, let alone walk." And I said, "Well, they put bayonets in my back and indicated I had to climb down that 8,000-foot tall mountain, so that's what I did on my own accord. They weren't helping me." And the doc said, "But you can't." I said, "You weren't there." Okay? You'd be surprised what the human body can do if the human brain will just give it an opportunity to do it. Yep. But the worst part were my burns. Okay? And I had third degree, on my arms, I had third degree burns. I rolled my flight suit sleeves up that day because it was a really hot day on the ramp at Ubon before we took off. And I never rolled them back down. And when I ejected, I went right through the fireball. I became a fireball. And I had third degree burns on both arms, skin totally gone. I got no medical treatment. And I was an old farm boy from New Jersey. I saw lots of wounds in animals, and I learned that you can use maggots to treat those. And so I let the flies get up my arms. They laid eggs hatched out the maggots. Maggots do not eat live flesh, they only eat dead flesh. And so maggots cleaned off my arms, took about 3 days. And then I cleaned them off with sterile fluid. Where do you think I got sterile fluid from? In the Henry Hill.
Urine.
Yeah, that's right, midstream urine. I flushed them off with midstream urine. And when I was captured, I was stripped naked except for my Batman t-shirt. I always flew with my Batman t-shirt for good luck. People asked me, well, did it work? And I said, well, I'm here. That's all I can say. A lot of bad things happened to me, but I did get out, so I guess it gave me luck. So I still had my Batman t-shirt. Had a chance to wash it once, so it was reasonably clean, white cotton cloth. Ripped it up into strips, wrapped my arms with it, and the wounds healed up. And took about 6 months. But when we're done here, you want to come and examine my arms. You'll be surprised how good they look. But that's what they look like at the time. Okay, next slide. I also suffered a few other injuries, like when I was tortured, I had both shoulders dislocated, and that's a pretty painful thing to experience. And to this day, my shoulders still hurt. There's not a day goes by that I don't have pain in my shoulders, and I'm not telling you that because I'm looking for sympathy, because I'm not. It's just a fact that what people undergoing the type of injuries that POWs in North Vietnam had to deal with, and lack of medical attention. We came home with the pains, and I still have pain in my shoulders, and some days I can raise my arms above my head, and some days I can't. Today's a good day. Yep. Thank you. Okay, next slide, please. The final one of our group is Gary Anderson. He didn't get injured quite as bad as the rest of us, and the worst thing he had was he got hit in the side of the head with a rifle butt when he was being tortured, broken eardrum. It got infected, and I don't know how many of you have had experienced ear infection, but you get a broken eardrum and it gets infected, and it scabs over, and then the pressure builds up because of all the fluids inside, and that is a maddening type of pain to have in the middle of your head. And it was just driving Gary nuts. He got to the point where he just couldn't stand it anymore. He found an old rusty nail, and he used that to re-puncture his own eardrum to relieve the pressure. And so I'm sitting there in the cell watching all this, and I came up with the bright idea that, well, peeing on my arm works so good for my arms, I offered to pee in his ear. Gary wasn't going to have any of that. But he was in such pain, he decided it's not a bad idea, but he's not going to let me do it. He's going to pee in his own ear. Now that became a real source of amusement for the rest of us. Because this is both a physics problem and an engineering problem. You know, there's a lot of calculations you have to make. You know, the strength of the stream, the arc, you know, the distance, you know, the head angle. But we worked that all out in a little bit of trial and error, and Gary ended up peeing in his own urine. Swear to God. Yep. You heard it here first. Okay, wrap it up here real quick. The injuries on shoot turn weren't the only problems we dealt with. There were other ailments that we faced as a group. And, one of the worst was ringworm. Hygiene was pretty much non-existent for us. Hot tropical environment, sweating all the time, not getting baths. Your body just covered with a grimy slime, and we all got ringworm, and that was pretty darn painful. Particularly if you got ringworm in the crotch region, which we usually did. And this is one of the exceptions where we did get medical attention. Guards would come around and ask if we had ringworm, and if we did, they would slap some iodine on it. Now these are laboratory grade bottles of iodine that they got from East Europeans, and how old it was I don't know, but it was so old that the crystalline iodine was sublimating on the necks of the bottle. So this was no longer 1% tincture, you know, it's much higher strength, and you don't want to have ringworm in the crotch and have that slapped on you. That's it's something you don't want to experience. Everybody thinks that the pandemic that we've been having recently was the only pandemic we've had in this country since July of 1968. I'm sorry, since 1918, the swine flu. But there was actually a worldwide flu epidemic in July of 1968. And the Vietnamese were very concerned about POWs getting the flu. I've never seen them that way. I mean, the injuries we had, they gave us no medical attention, but they were really worried about the flu. And so they came by that fall of 1968, and they gave us treatment to try to prevent the flu. And this wasn't Western style medicine. This was what I call voodoo medicine. They put garlic eye drops in our eyes because it was thought that garlic would help prevent you from getting the flu. And they gave us each a necklace made out of cloves of garlic to hang around our necks. I've been asked repeatedly, did it work? And I said, well, I really can't say. I know that nobody ever got the flu.
Yeah, no.
But on the other hand, one thing I can say for sure, that summer in 1968, we never once saw a single vampire. Had a typhoid epidemic went through Hanoi. One of our members, Gunnar Frederick, contracted it and died from it. He did not return, unfortunately. And then there were the worms, and everybody had worms, and that wasn't a pleasant thing. Next slide. Okay, I don't want to leave you with feeling sorry for us, because you saw our 90% survival rate. We did come home, and so how are you doing? Well, 80% of us stayed in the military, pretty high number. Quite a few flag officers. 249 of us made 06. Next slide. We're a very highly decorated group, including 8 medals of honors, 42 service crosses, 4 distinguished service medals. and a plethora of Silver Stars, Legion of Merit, DFCs, Bronze Stars, Purple Hearts. So, we got our share of those. Excellent. And a lot of us went back to school. Quite a few advanced degrees, and again, pretty impressive list, I would say, in final slide. And a number of our people went into public service. John McCain became a U.S. Senator, ran for president. Sam Johnson was a congressman from Texas. We had 10 ambassadors or military attaches, including one of our members was appointed by Bill Clinton as ambassador to Vietnam. How ironic is that? Okay. And one candidate for vice president, and a lot of state and local offices held in cabinet positions that too numerous to mention. So I'm gonna stop right there. I'm going over time. There are a few other things I'm going to talk about, but I won't at this point in time. I do want to give you a chance to ask some questions if you have any. Yes, sir.
One of the three elected or the enlisted was my supervisor at Eglin, 75 and 76. He was a staff sergeant, a helicopter, I think.
Yep.
And he was a captain when he got out. I guess they continually promote you when it comes up.
And for the officers, we were promoted along with our peers as long as we were in a POW or MIA status.
Well, he was a staff sergeant.
I'll get to that. And when we got back, we were guaranteed our first promotion after we got back. In the case of those three Air Force pararescue enlisted people, we gave them a battlefield promotion in Hanoi before we came home. That's right. And when we got back, President Nixon upheld those battlefield promotions.
It was wonderful meeting me coming in the shop that day. We had a big meeting and told us his story. He was our boss from then on. That was in 75. 33rd TAG Eglin. Powered age.
Any other questions?
I don't want to.
Have you visited the POW Museum down in Georgia?
No, I have not. No.
They stayed in.
Down near America. You know Boyd?
Chuck Boyd. Oh yeah, I knew him. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Did they keep y'all in a cell by yourselves all the time, or were you able to mingle and
No, we were not allowed to mingle for the most part. We were kept in semi-isolation, meaning there were usually 1, 2, or 3 people per cell. And three was probably the most common. But you were separated from each other, very seldom got outside the cells, never allowed to get out when another group of prisoners were out, weren't allowed to see each other, weren't allowed to talk to each other. But we kept ourselves going by the prison grapevines. We had the tap guns, which you probably heard about. We had the hand signals that we developed. And we operated as a military organization. By the end of the war, we knew everybody that was in captivity at the time. They moved us around a lot, which allowed us to find out who was living in each of the prison camps. And there were a few of us that had very good memories, and we were tasked with memorizing the names of all the POWs to guarantee that everybody came home, that nobody was going to be left behind. And I was one of the people that was so tasked. And every night before I went to bed, I recited the names of every single POW, last name, first name, rank at shoot down, aircraft they were flying, base or Navy ship they were flying from. A lot of information for over 600 different people. I memorized that and recited it every single night, so I wouldn't forget it. And when I came home and ended up in the hospital at Westover Air Force Base in Massachusetts, and the intelligence folks came in, and they had a lot of questions, and they started firing away, and I said, "Time out, guys. I need to do a data dump." I told them, go get a tape recorder or paper, pencil, whatever, and I gave them a data dump of all the names. And I didn't, because I didn't want to have to memorize them anymore. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Did their demeanor towards you ever soften a bit in all that time, or were they absolutely the enemy all day, every day? And did they feed you enough? Did you eat what they ate?
Yeah, well, let's talk about the feeding first. No, they didn't feed us enough. We absolutely did not get enough to eat. Our normal meal was, we're fed twice a day, okay? Usually at noon, and again at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And so you have a 4-hour gap between two meals, then you had to wait another 20 hours before you got the next one. And so you woke up really hungry every morning. And the typical meal was a bowl of soup and a plate of rice or a loaf of bread, depending on what they had available in your proximity to a bakery. The soup was not something you would buy in a restaurant in this country, put it that way. It was usually some kind of unidentifiable greens floating in water. They thought they were giving us meat. They liked to brag about the fact that they had us on a meat ration, 2 kilograms per person per month. 2 kilograms isn't a whole lot if you're eating at one meal. I mean, we had that much on our plate tonight. I think so. But that's how much they rationed for us. And what they considered meat was not what we consider meat. They considered any animal product to be meat. That meant lard to them was meat. Yep. Pork skin was meat. When they butchered a chicken threw it in the pot, they did gut it, by the way, and remove the feathers, but then they just chopped it all up, bones and all, and threw it in the pot. And one day your share of the meat ration might have been a beak or a claw, so we all lost a lot of weight. It just was not a lot to eat. And then there was the bread. I was in one prison camp, the zoo, where they were bringing us bread. They brought it into the camp once a month, stored it in empty 300-gallon drums. And the first couple of days of the month, it looked like bread and tasted like bread. And you got to the end of the month, it didn't resemble bread anymore. It was just a great big fuzzball of mold. Yeah. Yep. But you ate it anyway because that's all you got to eat. And it was laced with dead cockroaches and rat turds. And somebody asked me one time, what does a cockroach taste like? And I tell them, you don't want to ever eat a cockroach in most god-awful taste you can imagine. They asked me, well, what did rat turds taste like? Well, they taste like crap. What do you think they taste like? But I also always told people, if you're ever in that kind of a situation and you have a choice, of eating a cockroach or a rat turd. Eat the rat turd. Then there's the water. We never got enough to drink. Hot tropical environment, serious injuries that require a lot of water to heal. We did not get enough. So that was a tough. Now, about the demeanor. Early in the war, the guards were really sadistic people, psychotic. They should have been in jail themselves, truly. They got their jollies out of hurting people. Yep. That, when Ho Chi Minh died, however, late in '69, treatment started to change a little bit. They did start to ease up on us. They replaced the normal turnkey guards, who were usually junior enlisted, and replaced them with English-speaking NCOs. Their demeanor was a little easier on us. They weren't psychotic, okay? But they kept their distance. But at the same time, they liked to talk to us, because they used us to help improve their English. And that was a source of enjoyment for all of us, because we fed them so much crap you can't believe. But you had to be on your toes when you got pulled into a session just chit-chatting with one of these guys, because you never knew what kind of line of baloney the guy before you told him. And I remember one such incident, hot summer day, sweating like crazy, and going into a sit-down with this Vietnamese NCO, and he said, hot day, isn't it? And I said, yes, very hot day. And he said, what did you like to do in the U.S. on a hot day like this? I said, oh, I like to go to the corner bar, and have a beer, cold beer. And he said, we have many corner bars in Hanoi. Well, that was a typical line. No matter what we had in the U.S., they had many of them in Hanoi. Okay. Well, I knew better, but I said, okay, I'm going to play along. And he said, so what kind of beer do you like? And I said, there's a variety of beers I like. I especially like imported beers. And he said, I like imported beer too. And I said, oh, really? What? He had me hooked now. He said, so I said, what kind of imported beer do you like? And he said, my favorite is a Czechoslovakian beer called piss can beer. And I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. I got back to my cell and started tapping on the wall. Okay, which one of you SOBs fed this guy a line about piss can beer? So, life was tough in Hanoi, really tough. You can't relate to it. You can't imagine. It was an incredible hell, but we had our light moments too. One of the things that kept us going was to find humor in uniform, if you would. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
Can you finish with a real happy note on how long you all been back and how many POWs are still alive?
How long I've been back? It's coming up on 50 years. In a few months. Yeah. Out of the about 660 of us that came back alive, we still have just under 400. I think about 392 at last count that are still alive. I was one of the youngest POWs in North Vietnam, 25 years old when I was shot down.
Yeah.
So I'm 81. Many of our members are pushing 90. Many of them over 90. You know. And those of us that are still around are going pretty strong.
Yes, sir. Do you have any thoughts to share with us about Admiral Stockdale? I felt he was a Stanford professor and wrote brilliantly in a book called The Bad War that was published by Newsweek, and he was kind of thrown out like a deer in front of headlights in the vice presidential
He was a brilliant man, and those debates did not do him justice at all. I mean, I think that the press kind of crucified him, but he was a real leader in Vietnam. He was an inspiration for all of us, and he set the tone for the resistance policies early on, and so everybody that got shot down and went through the Hanoi Hilton learned his story and the orders that he had put forth for the rest of us to follow. And that was a pretty simple set of orders that, unlike what the Code of Conduct says, which was not realistic, we resisted interrogation as much as we could, to the point where we didn't think we could take it any longer. And then we had to say something to get them off our back, because you didn't want to lose your mental faculties, because then they've beaten you, you've lost total control. But our objective as POWs was we may be out of the war, but we're not, but the war's still going on, and we're still behaving like military men. We were organized, we had a chain of command, we obeyed the chain of command, we had orders of the day, and our whole objective was to survive and to come home with honor. And I think we did that.